Hello, friends, and welcome to Service of Change's Changecast, your podcast for change. I'm your host, Dennis Snappy II, with Service of Change, where small changes among the masses can have a massive impact around the world. Tonight's show, racism, prisons, art, and the psychological warfare behind them. We're going to be speaking to a gentleman who is quite the activist by the name of, I can't even pronounce his name. Lori, help me out here.
Avtomat
Avtomat.
Kalishnikova.
Avtomat Kalishnikova. It's the Russian AK-47. I totally drew a blank right there. One of those days. I was all prepped for that, man. Had a good intro going. Anyway.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate it. So let me bring my my co-hosts, my partners on the air tonight. Let me start off with my esteemed co-host, as I always say. We can also refer to him as the birthday boy, celebrating 55 years of life on this planet today. Joel, the provocateur Schaefer. Happy birthday, Joel.
Thank you. I'm only 54 today.
Only 54. There you go. You got the wisdom well beyond that in your years. I can say that.
No, I'm 38. Please.
38.
38.
38 years young.
A day older, not a day younger.
Are you having a nice birthday?
You know what? Me and you had talked about this before, like horoscopes and the truth that they kind of indicate. And I am always in my element during my astrological sign. I'm always in my element, so I'm feeling like really, really powerful, really in a good way.
On your A game.
Yeah, I feel just energized, so I'm doing great.
Good. Glad to hear it. Let me bring on the talented Miss Lori Latimer. Lori, how are you tonight? Lat attack.
I'm feeling all right. I got I think things are looking up for me. So
I'm glad they're looking up for. I know you and I have been talking behind the scenes. We're all set for The Art of Service, a collection of haiku poems that's coming out. What's the release date of that, Lori?
It is May 2nd, 2015.
So we are less than a month away. Are you excited for it?
I'm so excited, but then sometimes I want to throw up at the same time.
Please don't do that on the night of your launch party.
I won't.
Okay.
I won't.
Which reminds me, we got to nail down a date to do an Art of Service Changecast to talk about this book in a little bit more detail.
I'd love that.
So yeah, so let's set that up after the show, or this week through email. Okay. So before we get to our guests tonight, just want to go through a few things that have been happening in the service of change world. I've been very fortunate with some of the contacts that we've come across through this show and through just having a presence online. Our good friend Ray Davis, the author of Anunnaki Awake, we had him on I guess 2 or 3 weeks ago. Fantastic interview. You can check it out at the servicechange.com/changecast archives, where you can find his interview talking about his new book Anunnaki Awake. Some great discussion there. He did a blog interview with me and posted that up on 2 of his sites, and I really enjoyed the discussion we had through this blog posting. Please check it out when you get a chance. If you haven't read my new book, I Am Human, which is free online at serviceofchange.com/IamHuman. If you're not sure if this is your cup of tea, check out Ray's blog interview. It's really great questions that he asked me. We both had a lot of fun with it. So a big thank you to my friend Ray. If you're following on Google Hangouts, you can see the link on the right-hand side in the sidebar. It's going to be there, and also our Facebook page, facebook.com/serviceofchange, facebook.com/truthseekers has that link there as well for those. So check out Ray's stuff. Check out his book. Support Ray as well. He's doing some great things. And I'd also like to give a thank you to my friend, Miss Jerry. She had me on Revised Reality Radio this past Tuesday night, again, talking about I Am Human and some other spiritual aspects of life, what it is to be an empath, how it is to go through life feeling other people's emotions, and how it relates to my book as well. So check that out. There's a link, again, on the social media feeds at serviceofchange.com. That was a really fun interview that she did. So please check that out and support her show as well, because she's doing some really great things, and she's out there trying to help people. So we're going to try to get her on the show as well. So okay, those are my plugs of the things that I've had going on. Also, tomorrow's your last day. If you've read I Am Human and you write a review on Amazon.com, shoot me an email and you'll be entered to win a free autographed copy of the book of I Am Human. That would help me out greatly if you could write a review for it, and I'd love to do this giveaway to thank my readers. It's been a great great experience so far over the last 2 weeks from what I've been hearing from everybody reading it. So, okay. So, anything, Joel, anything to get into before I bring on our guest?
No, I just wanted to plug my video logs real quick, if you don't mind.
Please.
So, Joel Schaefer, JoelSchaefer. If you don't like me, you can go on there and hate mail me. I invite you. You can answer the question in my latest video log: am I pretentious, or am I insecure? That's my latest video log.
Okay. Hey, you know what? Get me those links. We can even throw that up on Joel's page.
Yeah.
If you want, if you want just another place to give it some exposure, it's up to you. If you don't want to, we don't have to. But
no, I don't mind.
Another spot for it to be, and I like that, man. Is Joel pretentious? What do you think of Joel? Send him an email. How do you want them to reach out to you, Joel? What's the best way?
You can comment. It's on it's YouTube. JoelSchaefer.
Okay, so go to YouTube.
Video logs.
Search Joel Schaefer, and within the next couple days, we'll have links up through Service of Change as well, and answer Joel's question: is he pretentious? Joel, I like this. I like that.
All
that
press is good press.
Yeah, there you go, man. Way to take a hit for the team too. All right, I like that. All right, cool, good stuff, Joel. We're gonna move to our guests. I'm gonna read the bio right now. Racism, prisons, art, and the psychological warfare behind them. Social change through art. So Avtomat holds an MFA in Design from Museum Studies, has a lifetime of experience as an artist, and has personal experience with what he refers to as the dark side of law enforcement issues in America. As an advocate, Avtomat aims to show the psychological warfare being used by the Fed for what it is. In a document titled The View from Here, Demoralization as a Means of Psychological Warfare, Avtomat states, the 1992 construction of the federal prison directly across the street from the African American Museum in Philadelphia was intended as a monument to the systematic enslavement of millions of black people through imprisonment. The prison's placement attempts to use demoralization as a means of psychological warfare. Avtomat is working to empower visitors to acknowledge odious attempts by the Federal Reserve System to demoralize them as a means of psychological warfare, give the museum back ownership of their Gallery 4 view, which has been hijacked by the construction of the prison, create a changeable work of art that will serve to mitigate the effects of the prison view on the changing exhibition space. That's some powerful stuff right there, and let me make sure I cue up his mic, bring him on. Avtomat, are you with us tonight?
1 2 1 2. I'm here.
Check. We got you.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. We have some heavy stuff there, man. You definitely caught my attention with all the stuff you sent me for your bio and the advocacy that you're working. It was so well written too. I definitely appreciate the way that was put together. So real quick, just a background. I saw you online speaking to some young kids about this stuff, and the reason why I wanted to have you on the show is this is a very touchy subject. It's a very sensitive subject, and I've seen this topic covered in the past speaking to black youth in a way that promotes racism. And in what I heard in the way that you spoke, it was, hey, here's the problem, and it was a way of empowering these kids that you were talking to. And I gained so much respect for the way that you handled this, because it's a very difficult subject. It's a very difficult conversation to have, and I think you had it in such a wonderful way. So that just drew me to you. So why don't you let's just bring you on the show? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your endeavors and what's going on here?
Well, thank you, number one, for having me on the show. I really am enjoying this platform, what you're doing with it. It's a great thing, and you're really creating a platform really is going to be able to enlighten a lot of people, and that's a great thing.
Thank you.
Appreciate the kind things that you said about the information I sent you about the piece. The piece was inspired by a piece I saw by an artist in Boston who did a giant banner on front of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which is a very Eurocentric museum of a Zulu warrior. And I was working with the museum, and when I first approached the museum, I was struck by this giant, image of the Zulu warrior on the front of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which was relatively out of place. And for me, it felt somewhat welcoming. When I went a little deeper, I found that the artist had did the piece as a statement of what one would not find inside the museum. And I found that very moving. I worked with the collections there extensively, and I did start to see that artist point. And in my work with museum studies, I found that museums typically, have a great opportunity ahead of them to work to include the stories of people who have previously been marginalized. So that's where my focus has been, is to go inside of museums and try to find site-specific art installations that can be done to kind of raise consciousness for political issues which may be arising and not be being dealt with in that museum's community. And I don't mean the geographic community, but the community of people that that museum serves generally. So the piece I did at the African American Museum came from consulting I was doing there on an exhibit they were building about the slave trade, called Cash Crop, by a great artist from North Carolina named Stephen Hayes. It was a really powerful exhibit of sculptures of a village full of African people that were in chains, and they were concrete sculptures. They were life-sized, and each of them was attached to a slave ship. So we're doing design for this gallery, and we're looking into what could be done with the view, and they didn't really want to cover it up. And the issue there is that the African American Museum is at 7th and Arch, and the only window faces the federal prison, which is directly across the street. And I started to question the curator and the administration there of what had typically been done to deal with it. And I found that they had tried to cover it, and they were, there really wasn't much they could do with it. And then as I dug deeper, I found that it wasn't just the view that was obstructed, but the entrance of the museum faces the entrance of the prison. So what ends up happening is you share the entrance experience between the prison and the museum. So people line up across the street because you can see it's a high-rise building, and the inmates can see, if you can stand in front of the African American Museum, inmates can see you. So the visitors, after they visit, line up outside and wave, and there's no bathroom, I later found out, in the waiting area of the prison. So people are commonly sent to the lobby of the African American Museum when they ask to use the bathroom while waiting to visit an inmate. All of this contributes to the experience that one has entering the museum, and the approach to a museum is a very important thing. If you can imagine the approach to the Art Museum in Philadelphia,
very grand.
It's very grand. It's very intentional in the way it makes you feel and the experience it provides. So if you can imagine what it does to a museum to share the entrance with a prison, it says something, and it does something very palpable to that museum's audience and the general community surrounding the museum. So for me, this was a great opportunity, a really obvious one, to try to give the African American Museum some sort of ownership back over that view. And in the research, I found that they did protest extensively the building of that prison there. They also protested the entrance being placed directly across from theirs. We're basically railroaded. There was some protest, and you can, I always encourage people to research these things for themselves. There's a lot available on it. There's a lot in the news about it, and you see as it goes on, the research. There was just less and less that they could do, and the project was just rolling forward. It was a huge project, and for me, there's a lot of intentionality in the idea that you would work, to place a prison across the street from an institution that interprets the African American experience, and as opposed to working to not place the prison there. So that was my motivation behind the piece and its meaning, and it's still available for viewing. It will change, and right now there's an image on the window of what the piece consists of now is an image of inmates inside the prison who are sewing military uniforms as a work detail. It is a clear picture that we're getting of people who are enslaved. The prison is receiving money to keep them in prison.
Right.
They're also receiving money through a military contract to produce those uniforms. And then they're also receiving money as rehabilitation, for the prisoners, as that's a work detail, and it qualifies as job training. So
they're triple dipping there, basically.
Yeah, and it becomes now the prisons are and a lot of times private. There's a lot of motivation, and it made me go to start researching prisons in general and finding that this was something that grew from slavery. A lot of the labor when slavery quote unquote ended was supplemented by Jim Crow laws, which allowed masses of people to be incarcerated for little or nothing, especially when it came time to do some construction or work, or there was a big project in town. You would round up, your laborers by arresting them, and there's a lot of cases of this, and I think in a lot of ways that's still going on today, and that the prison industrial complex has replaced the slave trade. And, this was also an opportunity for me to make a statement about that. The image I used on the window of the prisoners was from the prison's website. And I encouraged the museum also to later interpret the view with just nothing on the window, allowing visitors to see, the view in front of them with the interpretation, to not be afraid to just, take ownership over it by just stating what has been done.
Yeah, what's been there.
Yeah.
Wow. I come across this with the prison industrial complex in education alone. I mean, that's my background now is as a teacher, and seeing, number one, the poor conditions of the schools in Philadelphia, because that's where I started teaching, and questioning why when the state cuts money, are they cutting it from the poor school, the poor areas, the areas that cater to predominantly minority students, like Philadelphia, like Coatesville, like Chester. They're all areas where I've personally taught and are all struggling. And then you find out about the classroom education to prison pipeline. I forget how they word that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a real thing. I mean, they by third grade, I've done some research on this and written about it through my website. By third grade, they're looking at your test scores in third grade to determine how many beds to have available in a prison, in a jail. And these private prisons now are able to sue the state when they don't make their quotas that the state's promising them. We're going to have X amount of people, and if they don't have, now the prisons are suing the state. So in essence, is that justice? I'm going to say 1,000 times no. But yet this continues to happen. So I think I like your approach to it, because it's a protest, it's offering education, but it's not what you typically see. People get mad and they think, I got to protest, I got to go run out into the streets, but that has its value, but it doesn't always move us in the direction that we need to move it. I think this is very educational for people, and it spreads awareness, in that capacity. So I commend you for what you're doing here. So I like the way that you call this psychological warfare. Can you expand on that a little bit? Why you chose that terminology?
Well, I was working hard to try to figure out a way to articulate what it was that was being perpetrated here. I felt that it was definitely something intentional. But to really put it into words is difficult, and the only way I could see it was warfare. In that I started to speak to the experiences of the staff over the years of the African American Museum.
Uh-huh.
When I started to ask them, there was just several people who are still there from when they built the prison about what the conditions were exactly when that was happening. And they told me that it was a very emotional thing. It was a fight, that they felt that they were under attack, that this was something that was a kind of a slap in the face to them. His place was there since '76, and the prison came, several years later. Plans for the prison came several years later,
Mm-hmm.
and they were upset, and they felt that this was in some way, you know, uh, you know, just intentionally being placed right there, just right in front of their face, and it was really kind of trying to push them out.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at what the term demoralization as a means of warfare, it's a way that and maybe you can speak some to this, that militaries can use to as a strategy to try to weaken an enemy by demoralizing them. So if you drop leaflets, let's say that talk down on the enemy's cause, or you starve them out somehow and humiliate them, that is a very powerful means of warfare. And in this case, we're talking about a war of a group of people that is over policed, that is disproportionately arrested and held, least we forget is very recently coming out of enslavement. In many cases, not all cases, but a large group of the population at one point was enslaved, and then dealt with lots of political struggles, and all of those things contribute to a condition of warfare, which I think I'm working now. I should mention with some people who are teaching as reentry some of these histories of historic Germantown, of the people who were enslaved there and other parts of the city, and asking them to share those. And it really gets us to a place where we're able to start to at least have this conversation, share between generations, to try to start making a turn from just feeling that we're always being attacked, and just at least being aware that these things are going on, that there are forces at work that are actively trying to, at least we can all always agree that this is profitable for someone.
Right.
You can't. I find that people often can't agree of the motivation behind what I would consider to be like racist politics. Right. But we can all agree, whether or not we can agree, that those are actually going on, which in many cases are very hard to quantify. But we can always agree that this is really profitable for someone. I mean, there's a lot of people that are making a killing off of keeping people arrested for drug crimes, and things that we consider less than violent crimes. So I think this is really a way to just start to put it in the perspective of, there is a war going on, and while you may not have to pick up a gun or a megaphone or even a picket sign, be aware. Don't be a victim to the conditions that are being placed in front of you to try to make you just a being for profit of another human being.
Now, how would you recommend that somebody listening to this that may find themselves in a situation where they'd possibly could become a victim of that? What can they do to prevent that from happening? Prevent themselves from getting put into this pipeline, and incarcerated and thrown into this whole mess? What do you recommend to people out there?
Well, I mean, I think that's a good question. I would say that it's much more difficult for some people than others because of their condition. I mean, some people live in communities, and this is not exclusive to African American people, where there's just a lot of police activity, and we won't necessarily get into the reasons for that now, but it's difficult. The boys I was speaking to in the video you're speaking about, they all gave me personal accounts of them, and they're in this program where they leave school early and give away food, and they have it all set up with the school, and it's this great this great. I mean, it's a really beautiful thing that they're doing for their community. But they get stopped on the way there because they're, it's in between hours, and they get harassed, and they've been arrested, and, they really are afraid to, travel freely in their own community because of what they would, perceive as police harassment. So it's easier to say to people, well, keep your nose clean and, just kind of avoid trouble and get a hobby. But some people are dealing with this constantly. And for them, they need to know their rights. They need to know when their rights are being violated, when they do and do not have to, answer certain questions, which is, much more rarely than people would be led to believe. And even those things are very difficult to teach young people because you're putting them in an adversarial situation with a police officer. Which is, nowadays, as we all know, a life-threatening situation to begin with. So, I mean, I have two boys, and I work with a lot of different, children and young people. And what I tell them is to be aware, to don't think for a moment that you could let your guard down and relax because there's a war going on, and you're a target. There is someone who would love nothing more for you to slip even for a moment and allow yourself to become a slave. And that's what waits for you at every turn in many communities. And that's a lot of people's reality. And what I think we can all do as now that I feel like I've kind of aged out of this whole thing where I don't worry as much as I used to. I still am equally as concerned, but I don't worry as much as I used to about myself. I worry more about the kids. I don't think they're paying attention to those of us who are a little more mature and able to handle ourselves a little better intellectually. But I think the youth are targets, and I let them know that. And I think that the most important thing we can do is try to help them to deal with the emotional stress and the trauma that goes along with growing up in an environment where you're embattled constantly, where you're at war, where you're at least your emotional state is that of a target, is that of an enemy combatant in a battle where at every turn be it conditions of poverty or over policing or even your own undoing can cause you to slip and fall into a situation where you're enslaved. And I reiterate that because that's how I look at the system of imprisonment that as we have it today in America, slavery.
I have a couple.
Go ahead, Joel.
No, I just have a couple insights and observations, and segue into a question. When I was listening to you, Avtomat, I was really struck by the idea of art, and then the the juxtaposition of the prison with the museum, and in terms of some people would contend that that's just kind of like a superficial issue. It's like feng shui or something. But from what I understand about like some of the the modern postmodern philosophy that's out there has to do with narratives, and some of the thinking says that narratives precede like the material world. So the decisions that like a zoning board makes, or the decisions where you're going to put a prison, are informed by these kind of like nebulous narratives that we all kind of have our own, and they like layer on top of each other. So how a person, you know, feels about their legacy of their art is going to be reflected in perhaps their power or lack of power in the community to perhaps have a voice in politically or where they put a prison. And so I understand the idea that and this kind of goes back to Marx, and I don't necessarily agree that Marx's solution is the right. In fact, I don't agree at all that Marx's solution was the correct solution, but his identification of the problem has some value here, because resources are we are kind of at a war over resources. There's just no doubt about it. And the way resources are distributed, you know, we like to believe that it's based on merit, but it's not always based on merit. It's actually, some people trace it back to these very narratives that we tell ourselves about what is right, what is wrong, how, like, who gets jobs, who has power. All these different narratives like overlap and intersect with each other to kind of inform these processes by which things like this. So that's like a symptom of a deeper issue. And I thought of the Barnes Museum. When the Barnes Museum was in Lower Merion or something, the neighborhood complained because people were coming. So that kind of forced them to move. And so that's just, there's a discrepancy between the power that was exerted by the neighbors over that museum and the power that whatever community had over the African American Museum. That there's a differential in terms of the way a museum was treated in those two different situations.
Yeah, well, I think there's a question in there somewhere.
I mean, do you think there could be the choice of the museum, where it was placed, is more correlated to larger inequities rather than a direct? Because you were like, you can debate about the motivations. Do you think it's possible that in order to see what the in order to help determine motivation, because a lot of people I see who are skeptical of your account of these things, and I have been in the past, although I try to be open to it, they want to know what the motivation is. So they'll tend to discount this because it seems like there's like a kind of secretive cabal that's going, we're going to put this museum there just to deliberately and consciously hurt black people. Whereas I am more likely to accept the narrative that says that this is more indirect. So it's correlated to larger, in other words, that's just an African American museum. They don't have any say. Who's on their board?
Right.
You know, what politician do they know that can the people behind this museum have more political pull than the people who want to come to this museum or the people who are in charge of this museum. So my question is, could it be more correlation rather than direct causation?
Yeah, well, I think you make a great point in that I think those are conversations that are had at the city planning meetings. I do look at the African American Museum as being an anomaly. It was built in 1976, and it was, you know, built under contention. And in a large part, it was because of the planning, and in a lot of ways, it arrested the planning of that particular grid. There's a federal building there, a Federal Reserve, IRS building. There's the prison now, and the other side is police headquarters. There's that's now been taken over up the street by on 8th. There is all government buildings. You got a Transportation Bureau or whatever that's called, PennDOT, and so you know, they really seem to have a real plan for that area. And obviously, just by looking on Google Maps satellite, the African American Museum is not a part of that plan. It is, you know, historically underfunded by the city, as is typical for African American museums throughout the country. It's nothing, surprising. But I think from the research that I've done, it was pretty much evident that this place is kind of either meant to be ridden into the ground by kind of cutting it off from the rest of the museum area, where you have Fifth and Market, and the Constitution Center is right up the street, and instead of kind of incorporating in that, which it was kind of starting to happen, and then you have this big prison come in and really as a giant eyesore right across from the museum, and I think that it's a number of things. It's a number of things. I don't think that honestly that they just put the prison there to block the museum's view, but I think they had a lot of choices of where to put that museum, and rather where to put that prison. Even in the little research I've done, I mean, I'm no city planner, but I saw a couple sites that made a little more sense, or at least as much sense, and the African American Museum was a real victory for African American people, for museums, and for the city when it was built there. I think that said something really great about the city of Philadelphia, that Charles Blockson and these other great black historians that were a part of the founding of it, that they were able to accomplish that, and the city worked with them on that, and I mean, that was really something wonderful. So I think that not to kind of honor that by protecting what was going on there, and I really think in a lot of ways they, maybe it was an afterthought, but there was a lot of intent in the kind of neglect of reconsideration,
Well, that's why I brought up narratives, because when you talk about a museum, that museum is not just a place. That's a place where stories emanate, and stories have power, and stories should be encouraged with their power. So I empathize with that, because some people might, it's just a museum. How many people go to museum, and that's the devil's advocate, and I don't support that, because I understand that the spiritual, art is spiritual,
right?
And so the spiritual power precedes the material power in many ways, or the ways we're able to label our experiences in ways that give us strength and meaning. Then, consequently, from that emanates more material power for people that haven't had power. So I'm totally, on board with the idea that. Let's go ahead.
Well, I think you get to a really interesting point, which is, and Dennis, you were talking about this earlier with the educational system in Philadelphia being what it is, and I know you've worked, actually on the ground level of, education system, and really in the heart of it, and seen, the dark side of how bad things really are, in part due to the culture of poverty in the city, but in large part due to the, kind of strangling out of resources of the educational system. And I think museums are in a really special position of being this publicly funded institution that's dedicated to education, that welcomes in large groups of children, and is able to deliver a strong narrative with a lot of different learning styles and interactive elements and ways that schools just are not equipped to do. And as the schools fail further and further, museums become, especially for individual narratives like the African American Museum, really, kind of the last stand for what we, would consider, intellectual thought. The schools, are teaching less and less, and it's more and more to the curriculum, and at least if you want to learn about science, you can always go down to the Natural History Museum that Drexel's now affiliated with, and you can actually find a line of study through the museum that will take you to a career in the sciences, right through its sponsoring university. University of Penn Museum the same way, archaeology, and the African American Museum is very much the same way. You can a lot of their collection was once a part of the Charles Bloxon's collection, which is at Temple University. They have a great school of African American studies there, as they do at several other universities in the area. And the African American Museum would be your gateway to that narrative, as Joel was noting. And when you with museums, we were discussing the PMA. It's the threshold is really important. What you experience walking up to that museum. What do you feel? What does it look like when you walk in? A lot of attention is paid to that in every museum, and the African American Museum. I think that the biggest issue with the prison being there, and not only being there, but having the choosing to have the entrance directly across from the African American Museum's entrance, it really destroys the threshold experience for, and I shouldn't even say it destroys. It really creates. It works to create a very specific threshold experience for the African American Museum, which is that of a prison.
So I've got two questions in response to everything we've talked about as we're coming close to the end of the show, and the first one would be with this view of the prison and what it does to the story of the African American Museum and the history and the culture that's tied into that, to the African American community out there. What do you recommend for them in relationship to this issue and how it affects the museum itself and life within that community in Philadelphia? What advice do you have for them in the spirit of, at Service Change, we say small changes among the masses have massive impacts around the world? What do you advise or what do you recommend, for members of that community?
Well, thank you for asking that. A part of the piece was a feedback wall where visitors could kind of write, with chalk how the view made them feel with the interpretation, and there were some really strong responses. But I think the only thing that I'm an artist, so I don't expect that anybody's going to go out in front of the prison and protest. But I just like for people to be aware of that a big part of the experience that you get when you go to the African American Museum is affected in a very serious way by that prison being there and the entrance being there and the policies that exist within the prison that send people to the museum lobby to use the restroom, and send when the museum is closed, send them to the parking lot behind the museum to use the restroom. These things are an issue, and people should be upset by them, as they should if it was going on at the PMA or at the Barnes Foundation Museum. Because we value our museums here in Philadelphia. Museums are, one of the prides of our city. Our city is not built around City Hall; it's built around the Art Museum. It's the crown of our city, and that says a lot. And we have a ton of great museums here, and the African American Museum deserves a fair shake when it comes to their neighbors, their corporate neighbors, all the way around them, just like all the other museums deserve. And I think people can write letters to the prison. I don't think that would necessarily do anything. I think they could write letters to the museum, to larger museum institutions like the Smithsonian or the American Alliance of Museums, and make their voices heard. I don't necessarily personally believe that that will necessarily get the prison to take notice or make any consider making any changes, because I believe they're intentional in having things the way they have them. But I do think that starting these conversations and talking about them hopefully will lead people, Philadelphians, to a larger discussion about the system of crime and punishment in Philadelphia and in America, and the questions about the legitimacy of the prisons themselves, and should those people be being held in there? Is that what's best for our society? Are we helping them? Are we helping ourselves? Are we doing more damage by locking them in there, and profiting off of them until we return them into the community? Are we doing more damage to ourselves by keeping them, locked up without really trying to rehabilitate them, keeping them away from the community, away from their families? Is there a better way as human beings? I mean, can we come up with something better than that? Especially here in America, we're going to have to be the ones, and maybe here in Philadelphia, we're going to have to be the ones to ultimately say, this just isn't working. We're incarcerating our our population at 10 times the rate of any other country. It's crazy.
And that's beyond just a black and white thing. That's just in general Americans, and we know that the numbers are disproportionate, but just the fact that we have that many people, the percentage of our population in prison, but we don't realize that every day. We don't recognize, there's so many people in jail in America. We think people in prison, we think China, we think third world countries. We don't think about our own backyard having this serious issue.
It's an apocalypse, rather a holocaust of sorts. It's really generations of people, and not just black people, Americans that are being removed, and not to say that some people need to be separated from society. Some people need help. I agree.
Right.
But the way we're handling things, I think as human beings, you can look into a prison and have someone who served their debt to society explain to you what their experience was, and we can all understand that that's not where the direction that we want to head in as a society.
Right.
Well, if we get to that conversation, then we're getting somewhere.
Go ahead, Joel.
I worked in a halfway house as a counselor assistant for about a year, and we had a lot of drug court, Montgomery County drug court people that would come in there, and what we saw was that yes, co-occurring disorders, mental health, and drug problems were basically aggravating circumstances, and then life skills, and we were very poorly equipped, and everybody there was funded by Medicaid indirectly. Private insurances don't pay for halfway houses. But we did, like you said, in terms of some people need to be separated, we did encounter people that are just recalcitrant. They just did not want to participate in society in a way that's not going to cost society things. So in other words, they would just continually damage people financially and psychologically. They would go on runs and tears, but coming from the other side, there were people on the other hand, if they're given the right opportunities, and one of the things that is such a crime, but I understand it to a certain extent, because businesses kind of argue that they have a right to know what people they're hiring, but this idea of things come up on your record. I had something that I was acquitted for when I was a young person, and I was acquitted, but I still had to get it expunged. So I tried to get a job, and they're like, oh, you were accused of aggravated assault, or there's an ag assault charged with a deadly weapon under your name, and I'm like, but I was acquitted. They're like, it doesn't say that. You have to get acquittals expunged. So that's a way to. I mean, there's got to be a different way where people are given second chances. The people who are willing and able have to be given second chances.
What you guys are talking about is, and we're coming up on the end of our show here, but that's one of the reasons why I left the police department. I talked about that in my book, Service, how, a lot of times I question, is an arrest the best solution for this person here, for their family? Because a lot of times you arrest somebody, they lose work, they lose their job, now their kids are growing up without dad, and it's just a whole ripple effect where I started thinking, well, what if this guy instead went to some job training or got some counseling, or all these different options beforehand, if we had programs in place to prevent these things from happening, and then after the fact, if they need to receive their punishment for it, fine, do your time, but we're not really rehabilitating people. Like Avtomat said, making uniforms isn't really a form of rehabilitation or any beneficial job training for society. And that's what I don't understand from the education piece all the way up through the prison pipeline is I'd rather reinvest in my population, my country, my fellow citizens to benefit the country, not this slave sweatshop labor that we complain about. Oh, they make iPhones in the sweatshops, but it sounds like the same thing, and what they're doing here with that. So it's very concerning. So just to kind of summarize, Aftermath, what you said is what you want to see is this, the museum and the artwork that that you've been a part of is to stimulate that mature discussion of this is the problem. Let's find a way to move, to identify it, recognize it, and move beyond it and create a better way. Would that be a good summary of what you advised?
Absolutely. Yeah, what's going on is not only not working, but it's intentionally harmful, and that there's that we all know that there's a better way.
Mm-hmm.
Finding out what that is, I think putting people out of a prison and not giving them access to therapy for at least as long as they were in there, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we all know that there's more that we can do, and if we don't do more to deal with what's going on with our fellow citizens in these prisons, it's going to drag us all down. They're going to come out. A lot of these people get out of prison. If we're not helping them while they're in prison, and preventing more of them from going in,
right?
We're destroying ourselves at the same time.
And I've said this. Go ahead, Joel.
It's just a short-term thinking. It's not a longer-term
temporary fix.
Yeah, cost-benefit analysis. It's a part of our disposable attitude towards everything. Everything's disposable. Let's get a short-term fix for everything.
And I said this in some of my writing that in relationship to education, but I think it's relevant, is what you look at now as maybe an inner city problem today is going to eventually catch up with your own neighborhood, with somebody you know. It's going to affect people that you know because this problem is continuing to grow, and everybody knows somebody that's somehow affected by this. So it's going to impact you, your family, and your children one day, regardless of what culture you come from, what your cultural background is. So now's the time, again, in the spirit of service to change, that we as the people need to find a better way. And that what I don't mean by that is we haven't mentioned violence once in this. There's a lot of alternatives here, and I think the first step is through education. If you're not getting it in school, go to the museum, take your kids to the museum, ask people, and start to plan and say, how can we do things better? Because like we've said 1,000 times this show, this isn't working, and it's only getting worse. It's not going to come from a politician. Change is going to come from us, and we have that power to shape our future and go through it together, embracing our differences as strengths instead of problems and all the other stuff that's kind of been coming with this. So we're just about out of time. After that, let me give you a moment for your final thoughts, and if you have any websites or anything that you want to plug, please go ahead and do that.
Well, I'm anonymous, so I'm not, trying to promote anything but the art. But I'd just like to say I will promote museums. Museums are now available in Pennsylvania. You can get into a lot of them for $2 if you have an access card. There's a lot of free nights through Bank of America. Museums are getting more and more accessibility for people. They're serving the communities better and better. So lean on your museum, your local museum, or your favorite theme of museum, and encourage them to do some more work in the areas that you find interesting, and become a member and become a part of them. And they'll work more to serve the community as the community involves themselves more in the museum. So don't give up on the museums. They're our last resource for real education in America.
Well said. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Joel, see if he has any final thoughts before we wrap up the show. Joel?
I just think historically, just the decay of a society often begins with the decay of the higher institutions, the institutions or the cultures that that people consider less than like necessities, that they're not necessities. So that goes for museums, that goes for, art, and it's like that. When society gets desperate, it focuses on sheer and mere survival, and that's correlated with its downfall sometimes. So I think that we got to continue to ask these important questions about who we are and what stories we tell each other about who we are.
I like that point, Joel. Very, very good point. Good stuff. And let me just give it up to Lori Latimer if she has anything to say. And I want to give her props. She's running the Twitter and social media feeds for us tonight, and she actually created a new feed for us at Service of Change. It took us a while to do it, but she finally says, hey, why don't we have a Service of Change Twitter account? And we're getting a lot of success with that, a lot of feedback, a lot of interaction. I love Lori for everything that she's doing on that. So, Lori, any quick comments or anything you want to add before we close out the show?
I just want to say I'm glad that this conversation took place. I think, like Avtomat said, a kind of the precursor to change is just awareness, and you need to have these discussions. And even if your views feel challenged at times, it's we need to think about things that seem sometimes trivial, because lots of times there's meaning behind them. So I just loved listening to you guys. So thank you. And
I read Lori's book, and it's awesome. So all of your listeners should really. I mean, it's some deep haikus. It's really great poetry. So congratulations to you, Lori, and Dennis and Joel on your program is really great. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And Lori's book is amazing. It's it actually just popped up on the screen right now too. And that was just timing. I didn't even plan that.
Well timed.
So that's a sign. Pre-order your Kindle copy for 99 cents right now and support Lori. And those haikus are great conversation starters. They're great, for social change, having that, sparking those ideas and getting you thinking about a bunch of different things, which is our ultimate mission here at Service of Change. So we are just about out of time. I want to thank again our guest Avtomat for his insight tonight. Definitely go out and support those museums. Start having those conversations with people in your social circles and beyond and on social media. Please check out Lori's book, The Art of Service, a collection of haiku poems that's coming out on May 2nd for in paperback and in Kindle version. My book, I Am Human, serviceofchange.com/IamHuman. You can read it for free online at that website for signing up for my free newsletter, The Seeker. And also relevant to this discussion tonight, Service of Soldier's Journey, Counterintelligence, Law Enforcement, and the Violence of Urban Education. It's my memoir and my journey of the things that I've been through and kind of the things I learned and really what inspired everything that you're hearing tonight, the Changecast, the website, all that stuff. It stemmed from those experiences there. So you want to support Service of Change, that's a great way to do it by checking out some of our books and stuff. So that's all the time we have here. Check us out on iTunes at Service of Change. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter as well. Please continue to support us by liking and sharing our stuff. I'm Dennis Happy II. On behalf of Joel and Lori, thank you to our guest Avtomat tonight. Remember that small changes among the masses can have a massive impact around the world. Be that change. Thank you.